Hello once again everyone. So, time for another moveset breakdown, and I wanted to do something a little different, talking about one of my favorite enemies from gaming. So today we're going to be covering Rice's men from Dying Light, or as me and my buddy used to call them, Rice's guys. Now, important bit of context for these guys is why am I doing them instead of doing, the main character or any of the other characters from Dying Light? Is the main reason is because from a perspective of fighting ability, Rice's guys demonstrate a more varied approach and are also some of the only enemies in the game that specifically train for and are mostly focused on fighting other people. In fact, Zeds are kind of a secondary thing for them. Versus Kyle Crane, the main character, he tends to, mostly have to deal with Zeds and then occasionally have to deal with people. But another reason is because they showcase some more techniques that Kyle doesn't have. And while Kyle does get some really cool abilities, some of them aren't things I can physically replicate. They get a little bit into the overly gamey move sets, and it doesn't really tell us a whole lot about Kyle. Versus Rice's guys, there's a little more to them. And that's kind of the purpose of the show, is to see what we can learn about the characters by their movements. So, you'll notice that I'm using a Dusak for my stand-in weapon today. That's because Rice's guys use a variety of weapons. They have pretty much all of them use only one-handed weapons, though, with only one exception, I believe, and that's the right-hand man of Rise, who I believe uses a two-handed weapon. But anyway, they stick to one-handed weapons because that's what's mostly available. Early on, they'll be holding pipes, bats, hatchets especially, versus when you get into town, a lot of them will be favoring blades, specifically either machetes, kopeshes, and other sort of, what is the word for it? Reproductions of historical blades, which seem to be decently common. Now, their general stance is a relatively simplistic one. They're just going to be down, right leg forward, right hand forwards, their weapons out in front of them, and the other hand will generally be kind of hovering around here. Now, this is not an uncommon stance to see, especially amongst people that are, relatively used to fighting. It's a very mobile stance, and that's what they do a big part of. These guys will prefer to dodge as opposed to block, though they will block. So if an attack comes in, generally what's going to happen is they're going to duck their head down out of the way and move laterally. So if an attack comes in, they'll be doing a movement like that, and they'll do it to both directions. Sometimes it'll be a little more drastic of a movement, so sometimes it'll be that little step, other times it's going to be getting some actual distance. Now, we know based upon their movements they have a little bit of martial training, probably mostly from brawls or whatever they did beforehand. I believe Rice was a somewhat public official, but in the country of Huron that also seems to mean gangster. So probably most of these guys were his enforcers and as such had some street fighting experience. They don't tend to throw very many strikes with their left hand. That mostly seems to be just reserved for balance purposes or just in general to sort of cover. And in one of the promotional bits of artwork, we do actually see one of his guys using a dagger in the reverse hand to parry an incoming strike. And I think it's really unfortunate that they didn't put that into the final game, because that's a really cool aspect. But either way, instead, most of the time they'll be relying on movement, or if there's an attack that's coming in and they can't dodge, they will make a small parry, either to the outside or the inside. And their parry, meanwhile, is not going to be a great parry. It's not that they're attacking into it and then looking to close or anything. They're just putting the weapon between them and the incoming attack. So that would look like boom or boom. And notice as well when they come to the inside, there's a decent amount of shift into it. It's not an extended block, it's just enough to cover, and it's right back to middle. Now, the other thing they will do is they will execute kind of leaping attacks slash kicks are kind of their other big mix-ups. So as one of these guys is moving around, sometimes if you get complacent, they'll execute a kick, and it can be a variety of things. It is a push kick as opposed to a teep kick. They'll use it with their back leg and step into it, or sometimes you'll also see them execute a kick with their front leg. It seems to be just whichever is closest to you at the time. It's not a particularly well-practiced kick from the looks of things. They are all wearing very heavy boots, so they're mostly looking to just get hard distance or damage, which is a pretty common thing when you see them fighting the Zeds. if one of them gets cornered, he will kick to create distance, then move away to get even more so. So even though they're probably mostly intimidating people and fighting people, when they go out to get airdrops, these are probably the moves that they've cultivated. Now, before we get into their actual attacks, one more thing that they've cultivated for fighting against both people and Zeds is that all of them carry throwing weapons on them. Now, I've got just a little knife trainer here. I've actually got two. What they'll do is whenever there is a moment of pause or some distance, specifically if you try to run away with them with height, they will reach into a pocket and withdraw usually a decent sized throwing knife or even sometimes throwing axes, and then execute a simple attack. It's not going to be anything particular, just throwing a sharp thing at you. Just the same as the player will eventually end up doing it against them while you're fighting. Now, when we go into Rais's high tower, his command center, we see a lot of his dudes seem to practice with these all the time. They're little ranges that they've built within the tower. So it seems as though this has become both a good supplement to their fighting, as well as just a general sort of game or things that they practice. Now, when it comes to Rais's guys launching attacks, it gets relatively simple. They're going to be executing 1s and 2s mostly. You will occasionally see them execute a big wind-up 3, but for the most part it's going to be just descending attacks. They are relatively extended, so most of the time if they're executing an attack, they will cover distance and chase you down. You'll also sometimes see they'll run up before executing their attack. Just kind of varies, and they do tend to cut all the way through. A lot of the time when they finish their animation, they'll go ahead and be actually looking at the ground. Part of this is probably because they are overcommitting their weight forward, and that's causing their chest to go over their knee and thus bringing them down. Another part of it could be that they are intentionally putting a little bit of extra muscle into it to get through the skull or whatever armor the person they're fighting might be wearing. So a standard attack / movement from Rais's guys would look a bit like this. Either way. But overall, not a terribly complicated moveset, but one that I did want to talk about because hopefully, at some point, Dying Light 2 will come out, and I'd love to fight more human enemies because it looked like from the promotional stuff that we would get to parry, which would be super cool because I really wish I could have blocked against Rais's guys. But anyway, just a fun little one. I felt like doing it because I've always had a soft spot for them, and I was watching some Dying Light recently. So either way, hopefully you enjoyed, and we will break down some other movesets another time.